Week 2 of the preseason games is in the books. There's a lot of news out there. Some of it are signals that are important to dynasty managers. Some of it is just simply static. We'll sort through some of that later in the show. First, we will get our bearings on some of the key headlines of the week. This is Dynasty Compass. Hey, welcome to Dynasty Compass. I am your host, Jeff Blaylock, the other Jeff B. from Footballguys. It is Tuesday, August the 19th as I record this in the morning. So things that I may report on or say today may be different by the time that you have viewed this. We'll start, as we do every week, by getting our bearings. And we'll lead off with Brian Robinson Jr. and the unusual step that Washington took in putting their RB1 on the trade block at the end of this weekend. Now, they had the Monday night game last night, and Robinson did not play. Now, he's entering the fourth and final year of his rookie deal as a seventh-round pick. Now, according to Sport Track, the Commanders would save about $3 million against the cap by trading him, which they seem to want to do, or by releasing him. He had 799 rushing yards and 8 touchdowns last season to finish as the RB29 in PPR scoring. Now, the other running backs on the team, of course, you've got Austin Eckler, the veteran, who figures to be the passing down back. And otherwise, you've got Chris Rodriguez, Jeremy McNichols, who is on his 10th NFL team, and rookie Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, also known as Bill himself, a seventh-round pick. They are all in the mix. Now, none of those scream RB1 to me, but that may not matter. Washington may just simply use a committee approach to run and utilize Eckler as their passing down. Their tendency last year was to use Robinson as the runner and Eckler as the receiver. Now, you saw the game last night, hopefully, and you might have seen your league mates tripping over themselves putting in waiver claims for Bill Krosky-Merritt, who has generated a lot of camp buzz. At this point, he does seem to be poised to be the early down back, but that may not translate into a league-winning role. Robinson, as I mentioned, was RB29 last year. That put him in roughly the same range as Tyrone Tracy. Really good back, but not someone you can bank your fantasy hopes on. Now, and also remember, they have Deebo Samuel. And what did Deebo Samuel do last night in the preseason game? He took the very first carry on the very first play, jet sweep, for 19 yards. And remember, they'll have $3 million of cap space to play with if they trade or cut Robinson. Speaking of Bill Krosky-Merritt, you probably have seen the highlight of his 27-yard touchdown run. The rest of the day wasn't as good. His other 10 carries netted 19 yards against the Bengals' hideous run defense, and his 2 catches gained a net 0 yards. I think this whole business is more about a lack of faith in Robinson than it says anything about Krosky-Merritt. A committee approach is coming, and I believe it's going to render all of the Commanders' running backs unplayable in fantasy. So the play, I think, it's probably too late to scoop up Bill Krosky-Merritt for cheap. And I wouldn't trade for him right now because the price is going to be too high. If I had him, I'd consider selling him high right now because if I like the value I was getting back, because his value probably won't be any higher than it is at this moment. But if you scooped him up for nothing a couple of months ago or even a couple of weeks or even a few days ago, there's nothing wrong with seeing what you got. You took a dart throw. Sometimes those dart throws succeed. Sometimes they don't. If you end up getting nothing for it, no value back, you really didn't lose anything in the process. So that's what dart throws are. Up next is Joe Mixon. Now, there is a lot of murkiness around Joe Mixon's injury and his recovery timeline. Beat reporter Aaron Wilson said he expected Mixon will start the season on the NFI list, which is the equivalent of the PUP list from a fantasy standpoint. It would keep him out of at least the first 4 games. Now, I was already fading Mixon based on his high-volume usage. You guys have heard me talk about the scourge of 600 before. He's played through similar injuries in the past. This one seems more serious. He was walking around camp in a walking boot, for example. Now, I entered this week with Mixon ranked as my RB45. That's second lowest among my dynasty ranking colleagues at Footballguys. And that is a sign of my lack of faith in him as a longer-term dynasty asset, not just this season. The team brought in Nick Chubb a couple of months ago, suggesting the Texans thought that Mixon being unavailable was at least a possibility. And both Chubb and Mixon could be among the very best backs in the league when they're healthy. But that when is becoming a really, really big if. So the play here is not to acquire Mixon. He's 29, and if you have him, you may not be able to trade him right now. The best time to trade him might be right before he returns to play, whenever that is. And a league mate needs to shore up their running back starters either because of injuries or just lack of talent on their rosters. You might be able to get something for Mixon at that point. Otherwise, hang on and just see if he can return to form at some point this season. He could potentially be a late season benefit to you. I'm just not holding out a whole lot of hope. I'm also not holding out a whole lot of hope for the availability of Rashee Rice late in the season. Kansas City's wide receiver has a disciplinary hearing set for September 30th. Based on reports that I've read, the NFL seems intent on a double-digit game suspension for Rice. The players' union and Rice and his attorneys want a shorter one and arguing that there's no precedent for that long of suspension in a case like this. Now, Rice pleaded guilty to 2 third-degree felony charges stemming from his involvement in a street racing car crash that injured multiple people, but thankfully did not kill anyone in March of last year. The judge in this case is going to be the same one who presided over Deshaun Watson's disciplinary hearing. And in that case, she issued a decision about a month later, which the league appealed, and a settlement came out of that. Now, if we saw a similar timeline here, that would mean Rice would play the first 4 games, and then he could continue playing until a decision is handed down. But what that means is that he most likely misses most, if not all, of the back half of this season, including the fantasy playoffs. And that would make it the second year in a row that Rice has been out for the fantasy playoffs. So for me, the play was to sell him, and I've already done that. I traded him for a couple of future first and a future second round pick on the only roster that I had him on. I do not like people on my roster with what I call the knucklehead factor, and that's what we have here with Rice. So I was looking to move him. If you're a contender, he's not going to be there for you at the end of this season. So he is not an asset that I think you're going to be able to count on come playoff time. But if you're rebuilding, or if you're in that middling ground, you're in the East in our Dynasty Compass directions, and you want to take a chance on him, you could probably pull him from a contender who's going to need some other asset later in the season. And one bonus bearing we have is that moments ago, Colts head coach Shane Steichen named Daniel Jones as his starting quarterback for Week 1 over Anthony Richardson, and then doubled down on that by saying that Jones was not just his Week 1 starter, but his starter for the season. So we will see how long that lasts. And by that, I mean Steichen. All right, moving on. Now, I, as you may remember, came back from the Fantasy Football Expo last week. Brought lots of great memories, brought new friendships, and unfortunately, I brought back a rather nasty head cold. So there may be a few more jump cuts and weird sound breaks in here than usual because I am trying not to cough very hard while I'm recording. We are through week 2 of preseason matchups and nearly completed through training camps this season. We are, as of this morning, a week away from cutdown day when coaches have to trim their rosters to 53 players for the regular season. So this is as good a time as any to talk about all of the news that comes out of training camp, not the news items themselves necessarily, but just how to sort through all of it. There's just a lot of it. There's 32 teams and all kinds of resources out there for you to get information, to hear it from between the Twitters, the news reports, your favorite podcasts like mine, or your favorite fantasy football sites. A lot of it is going to be static. It's just noise. It's the white snow on the TV for those of you who remember analog TV, and for those of you who do not, watch the movie Poltergeist. That's what I'm talking about. The original one, not the remake. There are also signals that are out there. And so this segment, I want to look at what kinds of things are typically static versus what kinds of things are typically signals in order to help guide you through and wade through the news as it hits you like a fire hose this time of year. I think the number one trope that is likely to be static is something to the effect of, he's in the best shape of his life. You know, we've seen this a lot. year after year after year, either coming from the players themselves, describing themselves. Nick Chubb said that about 10 days ago, that he felt as good as he ever has. You saw it from Christian McCaffrey last year and during the summer, that he was feeling great. You see these kinds of remarks coming from various players, and no one who's really actually in the best shape of their life ever has to say something like that. They just are in the best shape of their life. So immediately when someone says that, to me, that is static. It's static at best. At worst, it could be a sign that something is actually wrong health-wise with this player, and it's something to keep an eye on. I think one of the biggest fallacies that we tend to make as analysts, and certainly as fantasy players, is to see a highlight of a single play, either in a drill or in a scrimmage or in a preseason game, such as last night's between the Commanders and the Bengals. And we see that as being representative of the entire body of work during training camp. And we want that to be what this player represents and what their opportunity is going to be going forward in the NFL. A good example of this, Bill Krosky-Merritt's 27-yard touchdown run was a terrific play. It's probably the only play of his that you saw from the entire game, and may very well be the only play of his you've seen this entire preseason. And that's definitely a highlight, but that's all that it is. It is just a highlight. Because if you saw the other 10 carries, you would see him struggle to pick up a total of 19 net yards. If you saw his 2 catches, you would have seen he got no net yards. So using that one play as the definitive vision of somebody for a preseason will cause you to overpay for that player, either in drafts or in trades. You will overvalue them. It's more about the longer term, what have they been doing throughout camp, than it is on any single play. Another trope we see a lot in training camp is coach speak praise with no specifics. Things like, he's a hard worker. He's the first guy in and the last guy out. He absorbs the playbook like no one I've ever seen. He does everything we ask of him and more. He's a great teammate. Those are the kinds of things that can be said about just about anybody during training camp. And honestly, what do we expect a head coach to say, or an offensive coordinator or a defensive coordinator to say about their players at this stage? Do we expect them to be brutally honest as to what their assessments are of the players? Or do we expect to give them the kinds of praise that you hear? In a similar vein, teammate hype is another trope we see a lot, where a teammate is hyping up a rookie or someone who's new to the team or an undrafted free agent. But it's the same thing as non-specific coach speak. What do you expect the teammate to say about their young teammate who may or may not make the team? It's not the teammate's choice, first of all, whether they make the team or not. So they have nothing to gain by saying anything particularly honest about the player's chances. So, of course, they're going to say nothing but great things about them. That's what teammates do. Another thing that is likely static is breathless descriptions of depth chart surprises. These are things that we weren't necessarily expecting to see on a depth chart, except sometimes that's exactly what we should have expected to see. I think a great example so far this year was when Sean Payton released the initial depth chart of the Denver Broncos, and he listed rookie R.J. Harvey as the RB6 behind a whole bunch of people. And there was quite the reaction on fantasy Twitter about how could Harvey possibly have been ranked there? What had he done? What was the situation? What was the matter? Were we overvaluing him? Well, if you looked at the rest of the depth chart, you would see that Payton ranked all of his rookies behind everyone else. In fact, that's what Sean Payton does. But because he was isolated on R.J. Harvey, and it was very clickbaity the way it was presented, it became a thing on the internet. So while it was made to be quite a thing, it really wasn't a thing at all. It's just normal practice for Sean Payton. As we get closer to the start of the regular season, as we get that first week depth chart, R.J. Harvey will be in the proper place where we would expect him to be, either first or second. But he started, as all rookies do, in sixth, or at least at the bottom of the depth chart. At this time of year, we also often see a lot of undrafted or late drafted rookie buzz generated about players who really have very low chance of actually making the team. If they do, primarily it would be as special teams players, but they're mostly bound for either the team's practice squad that they're on now or some other team's practice squad at some point in the season. The hit rate on late round draft picks and undrafted free agents is extraordinarily low. It's great if you can identify the stars that are there and be able to pull those out without having to pay full price for them. But they're definitely dart throws at this stage. The key to me is looking for consistency. Are they buzzy briefly because of one play they made, because of some vague coach speak that was said about them, or is there a buzz building based on their body of work that started at OTAs and is built up through training camp, has been matched by usage in preseason games, by performance on the field, and we can see that developing chemistry between them and the other players on the team. In that case, I think we do have something there. Otherwise, it's just static. And this is one I see a lot. It's the notion of conflating a particular practice where a player is out there with the ones in the 11-on-11 drills. They are lined up with the regular starters. The habit is to conflate this with the idea that that particular player has already earned or is earning significant playing time because they're running with the ones. Truth is, they could be running with the ones for any of a variety of reasons, including the player that would normally be playing there is being held out for some reason. The player that would be playing there we already know is going to be the starter, so why would we need to put him out there? Maybe let's see what this other kid has. The fact that they are with the ones, however, doesn't mean that they're a starter, they've earned significant playing time. It just literally means they're on the practice field with the ones in that particular practice. Now, if that happens day after day after day, I think we've got something. But if it happens once, they were just out there. Another bit of static that we see a lot, especially at this point in the preseason, is that the assumption that leaving a preseason game early means that a player has locked up a roster spot, or alternatively, that leaving it late or that leaving it after someone else left it means that they are in trouble in terms of the roster. Well, it is certainly the case that most coaches play their starters earlier in a game and then work their way down the depth chart as they go. That isn't always a given, and there are various reasons why coaches will make their game management decisions as to which players are in and which players are out. Depends on the situation, depends on health, depends on a number of things that they want to see. And so by itself, the fact that somebody is in a game late or left it early really doesn't have that much bearing on what their role is going to be in the season. In fact, I would say that the preseason games themselves probably have fairly little bearing on what coaches are going to do because they've got an entire body of work in camp to look at. What a lot of the static has in common... No, hang on, there's one more here. The entire narrative is around a player, or the buzz around a player is being driven by a single source. That's usually a sign of static. That's either someone imposing their own predetermined view upon the world, or they're looking for clicks because they are doing something that they're saying something that no one else is saying. This includes folks who will post about winners and losers of a particular game or a particular week of training camp, or any sort of evaluation that's just not lining up with what other scouts and other sources are saying about what's going on at a team's camp. Okay, I think you sense a theme here that we have lots of single instances of things that are being conflated with an entire body of work. Whether it's a narrative that's being driven by a single source, it's a single highlight play that's standing in place of an entire preseason, it's a single practice, it's a single rep, it's a single instance of a depth chart being released, it's a single instance of a coach saying something. All those things that just happen once, no matter how many times they're repeated and reflected across the internet space or bounced around among fantasy analysts, it's probably just static. So how do you know, if you don't have the ability to sit and watch this whole stream of information flow in front of you all day long, and I don't have that time either, how do you know what's an actual signal? How do you know what's breaking through the noise is something that might be actually actionable to you, an actionable nugget of information that you can use to improve your dynasty team? Well, the biggest of these is going to be a change in usage or role for a player that is sustained across multiple practices or multiple preseason games. So this is the complete opposite of something that happens once. This is something we're seeing day after day after day. They're running with the ones every day. They're lining up in the slot more, or they're lining up in lots of places more often. These are the kinds of things that indicate a shift in a role from what we were expecting before, and that's something that's actionable. We're also looking for consistency in both standout plays and that they actually are making the kinds of plays that are worthy of highlights, and they're doing that with the first teamers, but they're also doing something really important, and that's doing the dirty work. They're doing the blocking. They're doing the things on the field that the other players and coaches notice but perhaps we watching the film or watching the game live don't actually see. We're so busy watching the ball and the ball carrier, we may not see who's doing the blocking. If you were to watch a tape of the Chicago Bears game this past weekend, watch what Luther Burden is doing when he doesn't have the ball. He is blocking for his running back. He's blocking for another wide receiver. He's doing the kinds of things that his teammates are going to notice. Fortunately for us, Greg Olson, a former tight end and a commentator for the game, was noticing it as well. And so he was calling it out very helpfully. When you see something like that, that's when you line it up against a coach saying something like, this player does everything we ask of him and more. This player is absorbing the playbook. This player is a great teammate. That's a sign of it right there. Consistently doing the dirty work when their name's not being called on the field. Along those similar lines, when you have specific coach speak about roles or a spot on the team, or a coach who says, I didn't play my running back today because he's already on the team. We know what he's going to offer us and we're good, or something to that effect, that's a pretty sure sign that what the coach is saying is right on. About we understand what the role that player is going to have. We understand the role the player is going to play on the field for the team that year. And there's really nothing else to debate about that. The player's there. This is especially reinforceable if the coach repeats the praise or repeats the hint of what the role is going to be at various times in the preseason. Detroit head coach Dan Campbell, talking about Isaac Slaw, said after the game on August 16th, he said, at some point, we're going to need to use him this year. He's going to have to help us on special teams and on offense. And then a couple of days later, after practice, he said, at some point, we're going to need him, whether it's early or late, whatever that is. We're beginning to see how he might be able to do things for us on offense. We feel like he can do some things on special teams, which means we feel like he'll be active on game day. So as dynasty managers, we are often not so worried about who the top starters are going to be, because that's pretty obvious. We're looking at who are the last spots on our bench, what are the players that may have high upside or high value that we can bring onto our rosters that can make a difference down the stretch. If he has a role on special teams, that keeps him on the roster, that keeps him in front of the head coach, and that gives him opportunities to then expand that on the playing field and in practice week after week after week. Similarly, if we are seeing specific praise from coaches or teammates that is matching what we're seeing with our eyes in terms of on-field chemistry or quantifiable stats like snap shares or routes run, those are the kinds of things that are mutually reinforcing. It's just that the overall story arc is correct about this player, that the usage level is going to be what we are seeing and what they are saying. That might also be evidenced in changes on the depth chart that we see that's being consistent with what we're observing in camp. So to use an example from earlier, Sean Payton putting the rookies at the bottom of the depth chart, that did not match what we were seeing in camp. And so even if we didn't know that Sean Payton routinely put the rookies at the bottom of the depth chart, we knew that that depth chart was not reflective of what was actually happening. And when we see R.J. Harvey up here in the top in either the first or second positions, third position potentially, then we know that that depth chart's a little closer to reality and that we have a better idea of what the role of the player is going to be. And I harped earlier about single sources of information being largely static. One of the surest signs that you are looking at a signal instead of static is that multiple beat reporters are aligning on a player's usage, on their role, their availability, or their likelihood of making the team. It's a far cry from just one person making that statement. The whole collection of people who are around the team on a daily or weekly basis are getting that information, and that's what they're saying. And it's probably something that you can rely upon and use that into your decision-making for your dynasty team. So if there's a theme to any of this in terms of the difference between static and signal, it's consistency. It's consistency, consistency, consistency. The way I like to put it is this. Once is an outlier, twice is a coincidence, but 3 times is a trend. So the more often that you see something from different sources across different days that is consistent and lining up about the same player, about their role, about their usage, that's probably something that you can rely upon and make decisions about your fantasy roster based upon those signals that you're getting. So anytime that I see a bit of news that piques my interest and I think to myself, what is something what does this mean for Dynasty? What does it mean for my teams? I tend to ask myself these 3 questions. The first one is this a one-day thing? Is this something that has happened before? Is it happening regularly? Or is this just something that we've seen for the very first time and it just happened today? Is it a one source thing? Am I only hearing about this from one place or from one person? If I am, that makes it quite a bit more suspect as static than if I'm hearing it from multiple people. And then finally, is it a one scenario thing? Is it a scenario that you're not going to see regularly? If it's a one scenario thing, it's most likely static. If it's something that you see every day, it's most likely a signal. But either way, one of the keys is just simply not to act rashly, either to positive news or to negative news, whether it's a signal or whether it's static. Be rational and don't overreact to it. Yes, sometimes you have to move very quickly in Dynasty. But the best moves you can make very quickly are the ones when you have an open roster spot and you don't have to drop somebody else first. If I have an open spot on my roster, I'm much more willing to take an immediate stab at something that I believe is a signal and is an early indication that a player is going to have a much more expanded role than I think that they were going to have up until that point. However, if I have to drop a player first in order to make room for a player that I am reacting to news about, I have to be really careful about what am I giving up to chase this news about this particular player. Just make sure you understand the storyline of the person that you're dropping in order to pick up somebody based on news you've heard very recently. That concludes this week's episode of Dynasty Compass. Next week, we will take a look at the 5 kinds of players on a Dynasty roster, how you evaluate them, and what you can do with that information as you enter week 1 of the NFL season. See you next week.